Thanks for tuning in for another episode of our series of CIRP's mental health webinars. Enjoy and let us know your thoughts in the comments below.
My name is Lindsay Kearns, and I am the Outreach Coordinator for the BC Centre for Women in the Trades, which is a partnership of women in the trades, industry, and labour committed to creating a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the trades and other underrepresented sectors. Vicky, could you tell us about yourself and about construction rehab?
Absolutely. So I'm the Executive Director of Construction Industry Rehab Plan. Hopefully most of you watching today will know about CIRP. We offer mental health and substance use services to people struggling with mental health issues themselves, but also we do education and training for the industry.
Wonderful, thank you. So before we start, we do want to make sure that you know that both BC Centre for Women in the Trades and Construction Industry Rehab would like to know what we can do to support you. You are our members in the trades, and we want to help you maintain positive mental health. So you can answer the polls down below to give us some information, and use the chat feature, as Nicole mentioned earlier, to send us thoughts and comments and ask questions as well. So, Vicky, if you could tell us what is assertive and what is aggressive communication?
Yeah. So assertive communication is associated with assertive behaviour. It's communication which enables a person to act in his or her own best interest, to stand up for themselves without undue anxiety. So it's the fact that you feel confident enough to do that, and you're able to express your honest feelings comfortably, and to express your own rights without denying the rights of others. So that is assertive behaviour, communications. And I think the key thing in there is you're able to exercise your own rights without denying the rights of others. On the other hand, you have aggressive behaviour or aggressive communication, which is the complete opposite. It's communication or behaviour that's forceful, that's hostile, attacking. It can occur either in retaliation or without provocation. In psychology and other social and behavioural sciences, aggressive behaviour involves an intention to cause harm. So people are deliberately speaking in a way or communicating in a way that intends to cause harm, even if only as a means to an end.
Speaking of all the things that tradeswomen deal with, this is actually something that I'm really glad we're talking about, because of the fact that one of the things that tradeswomen deal with a lot on construction sites and in other sort of work environments where they're employed is trying to find a balance between standing up for themselves, and often actually instead of defaulting to aggressive, they end up defaulting to more of a passive communication style, and then they often find that their needs aren't being met, and then sometimes the advice they're given is to go into an aggressive sort of communication style. And so this is one of the reasons why I really am excited to talk about this today, is because I really want to make sure that women know that when someone isn't being particularly kind or considerate or helpful to you, instead of reacting in a passive manner, you don't actually have to then throw it back at them, but you can just state your needs and move forward using an assertive style.
Exactly. I find it really interesting that you're talking there about people are actually being asked to be more aggressive versus assertive. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that we're not really, I mean, I say this all the time, but when we're at school, or trade school for that matter, you know, we're taught the skills of you know, now I'm going to show my ignorance in trades, hammers and nails and wires, and have I got everything there, Lindsay? Tools. But what we're not taught about is communication and how to communicate effectively. And it's the same at, you know, early school. When we're at school, we're not really taught how to what is aggressive and what is assertive. But it's really important, and the reason it's important is because when we are not able to assert ourselves, it can really affect and impact our self-esteem, and that's huge. And certainly in psychology, and certainly on our program, self-esteem issues are probably, I would say probably across the board for everybody we see. All the negative things that happen in life generally tend to impact our self-esteem quite significantly. And if you're assertive, you're able to reduce your stress. You can also reduce anger. Now, reducing your anger is really, really important. Did you know that 2 hours, up to 2 hours after somebody has an angry outburst, so if you're not able to assert yourself, or you're being aggressive, or you're being told to be aggressive in your communication, 2 hours after an angry outburst, your risk for a heart attack doubles.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, it weakens your immune system. Actually getting angry is one of the things that is linked to increased anxiety as well. There's a great study in 2012 that showed this. So it's super important that we are learning to communicate in an assertive manner and not an aggressive manner, and to know the difference.
And actually, I got a wonderful phrase about that that came from one of the tradeswomen who's a great mentor to me in our larger tradeswomen network. And she was talking about how women are often encouraged when they're dealing with put downs and things at work to make sassy comments back and to laugh off these sorts of conflicts that come up. And she was talking about the need to be brave enough to actually to just say, to call something out and just say like, well, that's inappropriate. And she says that assertiveness is a professional skill, and her phrase that she uses is, say what you mean, but don't say it mean.
Oh, I love that.
I love it too. I think it's wonderful.
We should give that person a shout out for sure. So before I carry on, one of the things I'll say to you, to everybody watching here, is join in, make your comments. It really does. I think it makes for a really rich conversation when we can actually engage with you guys out there. So give us your comments, give us your thoughts, and we'll attempt to answer them as we go through the presentation. So talking about communication styles, right? We're talking about assertive and aggressive, but there's actually 4 communication styles that exist. There's, Lindsay, you mentioned one earlier, that's the passive communicator. That's somebody that really isn't able to voice their viewpoint at all. Then you have the passive aggressive communicator. I think we all know somebody in our lives that is a passive aggressive communicator, and I'll put my hands up. At some points in my life I have been a passive aggressive communicator. We've got the aggressive communicator, and we've also got the assertive communicator. So passive communicators, they're usually really easy to get along with, so you can usually identify them in the workplace. Everybody loves a passive communicator. They don't say no very often, right? So that they're not telling you no. They're really easy to get on with. They tend to have poor eye contact. They don't tend to make a lot of eye contact. They often, whilst other people may love passive communicators because they just do what everybody else wants, they themselves will often feel like that they're never considered. It's because they're failing to express their needs. They're often at the center of miscommunications as well. So whenever you have somebody that has passive communication, they're often, whenever there's confusion at work or misunderstandings at work, it's usually the passive communicator that's in the center of this. Then you've got the passive aggressive. This person is really they're passive on the surface, but they're going to make comments that come as a result of resentment that builds up for them, and it's kind of seething resentment, and it's when these people are kind of acting out in subtler and indirect ways. This person can often feel powerless or stuck. They tend to act out on their own, very subtly. They have difficulty acknowledging when they're angry, and they will, on the surface, will often come over as very cooperative, but they, in their actions, will do the complete opposite, and it can cause a lot of problems at work, definitely. They don't confront people or the issues. They'll often tell you, oh God, there's no problem here. They will often say things like, that's fine with me, but don't be surprised if someone else gets mad. Right? That's a very passive aggressive, because it's kind of saying, I'm not getting mad. But oh yeah, it's fine with me, but don't be surprised if someone else gets mad. And that's a very passive aggressive way of communicating. Aggressive communicators, right? So these are very easy to see, I think, very easy to see. You'll hear it, you'll see it, you might even feel it, right? The types of things that people with who are aggressive in the way they communicate often have very loud voices, right? So aggressive communicators will actually have a voice that is louder than most people. So physically, it's very loud. They will blame and criticize other people. Lots of really staring you in the eyes, and they'll make demands. You'll often hear things like, "You're wrong." That's a very aggressive way to communicate. So it's often kind of saying, "I'm right, you're wrong." And it's about getting your own way no matter what. And it's often about placing blame on the other person. Now, then you've got the assertive communicator. This really is, and it's been shown time and time again, assertive communication is the most effective form of communication. It's open, it's not overbearing. People get to express their own needs, their desires, their ideas and feelings, but they're also considerate of other people. So it's not all about me, me, me. So what they're doing is, in this situation, they're actually looking for everybody in the conversation to be winning. So one of the things that we say, or I certainly say in my practice, is I'm okay, you're okay. So if ever you're communicating with somebody and you can honestly say I'm okay, you're okay, you know that you're doing a good job of assertive communication. If ever you're having a conversation and it's actually you're okay, but I'm not okay, that's an indication that the other person is aggressive in their communication, or maybe they're not aggressive, but you're certainly passive in your communication. So you want to listen out for that. And that's a tip that I'd give to anybody that's watching out there, is just ask yourself that when you're talking to somebody, is it an I'm okay, you're okay situation? It's a really useful kind of little tip that you can use. So they're the 4 types of communication styles that we have. So just kind of going through it quickly. Passive people will be afraid to speak up. Assertive people speak openly. Aggressive people, they'll interrupt and talk over other people. As passive will speak softly. Assertive will use a conversational tone. Aggressive will speak loudly. Assertive people show little or no expression. So in their face, they tend to be passive people tend to be very expressionless when they're engaging with other people. Assertive people will have the right amount of expression. Aggressive people, surprise, surprise, will have really big kind of loud expressions, and they'll often stand with their arms crossed and they'll be invading other people's spaces. So again, passive people will agree with other people despite how they feel. Whereas if you're speaking assertively, what you'll do is speak to the point of discussion. You're not going to be speaking about somebody individually. Aggressive people, or people that are communicating aggressively, will only consider their own feelings and their own demands. And again, just so to kind of wrap that up, or to encapsulate that. So a passive person doesn't usually reach the goals of what they are trying to communicate, and they may not even know their own goals. An assertive person will reach the goals without alienating other people. We all know somebody who, no matter how difficult that conversation, usually comes out of it, and everybody still loves that person. And that's usually because that person's been able to communicate assertively without alienating another person. An aggressive person will reach goals, but they will hurt others in the process, right? So they'll be hurting people's feelings. They're not doing it. They're not doing it with other people in mind.
So, Vicky, if I could interrupt here.
For sure.
We've had a question from the audience asking if you can give an example of how the 3 styles of communication are used in the same scenario. So I know you've kind of touched on it, but if we could maybe have a specific scenario.
Okay. So let's say there's a change of procedure. So somebody who is passive, and let's just use a worker, an employee, somebody that's on the tools themselves. Let's say that person. So someone who's passive might know that this procedure isn't working. Now, you'll have to forgive me because I'm not a tradesperson, unfortunately, so I'm probably going to get all this wrong. But there might be a procedure that's going on, or a type of way of doing something. I can see Lindsay laughing at me. And so someone who's passive, they may be very afraid to speak up, and they just wouldn't speak up. They'll go along, they might grumble to themselves, they might complain to somebody else as well, but what they're not doing is actually telling the person that's designing that procedure, whatever it might be, that actually this isn't the way that works for us, or this isn't the right way, or there's faults in the way that we're doing this. But what they're going to do is they might just listen to what that person says and then does it their own way anyway. That's very passive. Or they might just grumble, or they might tell their friends that this isn't how you do that. So I think that's very clearly a passive way to speak. Now, an aggressive way to communicate this might be to say, listen, I ain't doing this. You can't make me do this. I'm not going to do it. You've got to find another way. And if you don't do it the way that I want you to do it, or the way that I'm suggesting, I'm just going to come off tools. Now, I don't even know if that's even possible, but that would be an example where someone says, you know, one side is, I know it's wrong, but I'm just going to tell other people it's wrong, and hopefully somebody else will take that and, you know, mantle up. Or the other way is to kind of go, I'm not going to do it. I'm just down tools. I told you before this was wrong. If only you had listened to me when I told you, that kind of thing. Assertive person would basically say, listen, I think this is why this procedure isn't working. Here's why I don't think it's working. I would really appreciate it if you could explain to me why you think this does work. And kind of really talking in that way. And so when you do that, in that method, you're making sure that you're okay because you're voicing that. You're making sure they're okay because you're not saying that you've done this wrong, but what you're saying is, can you explain this to me? And then you may have that discussion.
And I really like that, because what you're talking about there is also depersonalizing it. You're not apologizing. You're not placing blame on them. You're just saying, these are the facts as I see them. Can you explain how you see it so we can come together on this?
Yeah.
And this is something that we hear a lot from tradeswomen who over apologize. And even if you say, I'm sorry, and you mean it in a sympathetic way, often that's taken as, I'm sorry, it's my fault. Mm-hmm. And so we actually need to work on not apologizing for things when they're not something that is our fault. And it's also not something that needs to be apologized for, because it's just something that happened, or it's just a fact. It's the way things are. And so I really like what you're saying there, Vicky, about that is the middle road there of stating facts, depersonalizing it, and focusing on how can we move forward.
Exactly. And that is actually, you probably put it there a little bit better than I did. And that is that the point I was making there is just that, is that when you are speaking assertively, you stick to facts. You never make it about an individual specifically, right? And so stick to the facts. And if it is about another person, if I sit here and I want to tell, you know, I might want to say to Lindsay, I don't like something that Lindsay's done, and it's about her behavior. So it actually is about another person and not a procedure. But again, in those cases, anytime, one of the things when I've worked with children in the past, one of the things I always say is, when you go to a sports match, you know those little pointy foam fingers? Imagine you've got one of those, and anytime you say the word you, imagine that great big finger coming over and going you. Right? That's how to imagine it, and that's how it's taken when anytime you use the word you. So in order to be assertive, it's often what you can do is keep to what your emotions are. So you might say, I'm very frustrated by the conversation that we are engaging in, rather than saying, you're pissing me off, or, well, am I allowed to say that? Lindsay, you're really making me angry. You know, you're making me really mad. It's all about you. So when you're engaging in assertive conversation, what you might want to say is, I'm very frustrated by the conversation that you and I are engaging in. That's a far more, you're going to get so much further when you have those kind of conversations. And again, if you listen to what we've said there, or what I said there, it's very much, I'm okay, you're okay. I haven't attacked you, right? So that's the key thing. Always listen out in your mind, ask yourself, am I okay? Are they okay? And then you adjust your tone and the way that you're conversing accordingly.
And another trick that actually I also learned from a fellow tradeswoman is to say thank you. And it's funny because last week we talked about the attitude of gratitude. And so this is kind of using that as a tool in conversations with somebody. And so when you're in conflict with them, thanking them for discussing this with you and thanking them for their time, like while you're doing it, saying, hey, thanks, I'm really excited to have this opportunity to try to figure this out. Or, hey, thanks for engaging me on this because I'm really frustrated.
Yeah.
And so you're saying to them, even though maybe they're coming across as they're actually quite angry with you or the situation, and you're taking that and saying, hey, I recognize that you're putting energy into this. It's depersonalizing it by saying, but it's recognizing them and the energy they're putting in and taking a step back from that energy being about you, but being about the issue.
Yeah.
And so, thank you for your time. Thank you for offering. Thank
Yeah.
you for offering to do this thing for me that I don't need you to do because it's actually my job. And so I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And I love that too, because it actually makes that person take a step back and think for a second of, oh yeah, I actually am contributing here. And it might give them a break where they can change their approach from being aggressive to maybe them being assertive.
Absolutely.
I think that's, sorry, Vicky, if I could interrupt. I think that's something that's really quite interesting, and it kind of covers another question that we've had from the audience. The question from the audience was, any suggestions for maintaining our assertive approach when the response is aggressive? Yes. I find some people aren't comfortable with a woman being assertive, and I think you've touched on a couple of points, but is there anything else you might want to add to answer that question?
Definitely. I would say one of the keys to assertive communication when you are speaking to an aggressor is really, I love what Lindsay had to say, is at the end, thank them for not for the perhaps the content, because you may not agree with the content, but you can certainly thank them for engaging in the conversation. That's an easy thank, I think. What I would say, one of the things I would say is take it away from you. It's very difficult for somebody to get mad when you're talking about what's going on for you. So that's a good way to have assertive communication and to avoid and actually change an aggressor to become quite neutral. It's a strategy we use in counselling. So what you're doing is when somebody is mad about something, we call it externalizing. So we're going to take the problem and we're going to externalize it to the situation. So we're going to talk about the problem and we're not going to talk about you. Remember that foamy finger. Anytime anybody says the word you, there's this great foam finger that starts pointing. So if you can avoid, takes a hell of a lot of practice, but again, as clinicians, it's something that we become routinely very used to doing insofar as that we don't even use the word you when we're talking to another person. If we have to talk to somebody who's angry, we rarely use the word you. We just don't use it. So avoid saying you to somebody that's already angry, because that's just going to inflate the situation. Definitely avoid that. The other thing to do is to externalize the issue. Talk about how you are feeling, and I think normally I wouldn't say this, but I think specific to the tradeswomen, I think we want to avoid emotions that kind of say that other people are stigmatizing you for within the industry. So you don't want, crying, sad, those kind of emotions if you can, but you might want to use words like, I'm frustrated by, or I'm confused by. And if you stick to yourself, it's really difficult for someone else to get angry, very difficult. In fact, you'll actually bring that situation down. Externalize the problem. So you're not talking about what they've done to the problem, just stick to the problem and stick to how your emotions are feeling, and you should find that to come down. There's a little swift saying that I always have, and I say, a person who feels understood will not be your enemy. And that has always held true to me. So if you can get that person to just understand, and again, the way that you're going to get them to understand is not have that wall come up, and the way you don't have the wall come up is avoid the foam finger. So just don't say you. I hope that helps. It's a bit short.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that went really well with what Sandra was saying in the chat by saying that she says, I think assertive statements often begin with I, whereas aggressive statements often begin with you.
Absolutely. Well done, Sandra.
Well, and I think that this is something that we've heard about also from women in leadership circles in business. There's a writer who's written a lot about women in business, Robin J. Eli, and one of her sayings that she talks a lot about is that she talks about the stereotypes, and so she says if I'm acting like a leader, I am violating a gender stereotype, and if I'm acting like a woman, I am violating a leadership stereotype. And it's this whole idea that a lot of the time women have to choose between being liked and being seen as competent. And this is one of those things that I think is part of a cultural shift that as tradeswomen we are continually having to work on, and we have amazing allies throughout the industry of all genders helping to change this. But it is frankly just also where we're at, that is one of the things we are up against. And it is happening. I think it is changing. I've had a great successful career in construction sites as someone who is quite assertive, but it is something that I think we all need to work on.
So Lindsay, I have a question for you. Why do you think that in the year 2020 women are still so uncomfortable being assertive? What are we so frightened of?
Well, and I think that's what it is too. It is that whole thing of like, do we want to be liked? There is a pressure to be socially accepted, and especially in an industry where we are so much in the minority and we want to fit in. And so part of that is making sure that people don't have conflict with us. And unfortunately, sometimes that means that we then subsume our own needs and also the needs of our projects under that, and we can't. And so then we have that battle going on.
So from absolutely, and I completely agree with everything that you're saying there, Lindsay. From a psychological perspective, from our point of view, girls and women are conditioned to behave and be more passive in situations from a very, very early age. There are many studies that show that young girls from as early as 2 have already started to assume gender-related behaviours, gender styles. Like it's very much something that they start absorbing very, very early. So as little girls, we're told to be good little girls and quiet little girls, and you do as you're told. Where boys are really encouraged to be wild and rambunctious and really get out there and kind of make their mark on the world. Where we're girls still in 2020, they're still taught to be less so now, but it's even though I think there is a shift happening, and there are. I mean, I think about myself and my daughter who's pregnant, and we talk about her and the children and the way that she intends to raise her kids, and it is very different. But we are still, we still have other generations that we are influenced by. We still have grandparents, we still have media that very much, values when a woman is quiet and delicate almost. Anytime a woman speaks up, it's always she was. The headlines are very much different to when a man speaks up. So even in 2020, we are conditioned, women are conditioned to behave more passively and to act in a way that's more agreeable to a very much a patriarchal society, to be honest with you.
That's very interesting. I'm just conscious of the time, but we do have one more question here that I think would be quite worthy to answer. The question is, any advice for somebody on the autism spectrum, high functioning or Asperger's, who has a terrible time being passive and acquiescent to avoid conflict and stress in interpersonal encounters?
Yes, I love that question. So I personally have, I would argue, a good deal of experience with someone on the spectrum. I have 2 members of my family who are on the spectrum, suspect 3 people. It's way more common than we think. Anyway, So yes, so one of the key strategies, and I can actually go through 5 steps with you, and this is something I do with my own family members, it's something I do with other people as well. The first thing you've got to do is identify your current communication style. What we're actually going to do at the end of this is we'll actually post up a presentation for you, and you can actually use that and have a look at that. So you need to identify your current communication style. Is it passive aggressive? Is it passive? Or is it assertive? I don't know. Or is it aggressive? Once you do that, the next step is to really look at how you communicate. Think about a conversation you've had that didn't go well. How often did you use the I statement? How often did you not? Someone that is on the spectrum, they see things as very black and white, often it's very black and white. So using the I statements is really about identifying your own feeling, which can be quite difficult for somebody that's on the spectrum as well. You've also got to practice saying no, right? So that's and that's something that doesn't come naturally for a lot of women. Actually, it doesn't come naturally for a lot of people. So you've got to practice saying no. Rehearse what you've got to say, and this is something I use with my family members often. When I know that there's a conversation coming up that needs to happen, or my son lets me know that there's something that's going to be coming up, I will sit and rehearse at length what they're going to say. And also body language, and this is where it gets tricky for someone that's on the spectrum. Body language, people that are on the spectrum, their affect, which is your outward display of emotions, is very flat. So people on the spectrum have a very flat affect. So what I always suggest is we stand in front of a mirror, and we'll practice that, and then we'll look at what's going on in the mirror, and you'll be surprised. People that are on the spectrum will go, well, I didn't think I looked like that. I thought I looked, because this is how I feel, but when I look in the mirror, that's not what's going on in my face. So I would say you have to very consciously practice looking in the mirror and seeing that, does your face, does your body language, does your hands, do they reflect what you're trying to convey? So often, for example, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, but this is what I do with my son. When he wants to express happiness, he'll often go, yeah, I'm happy. And that's what you'll see. But he does feel happy, but he doesn't show it, because that's very common with ASD, the flat affect. So I will say to him, when you're happy, we smile, and I'll kind of really exaggerate it. And he feels uncomfortable when he does it sometimes, but he learns to practice that. So I would actually say, when you're in private, practice using I statements, practice saying no, practice the conversation you're going to have, and then do it in the mirror, so you can actually see the affect that you're presenting.
And actually, even beyond folks who are on the autism spectrum, one of the things that is something that I see and participate in all the time in our tradeswomen groups, whether we're talking about our in-person meetups, or right now, because of the pandemic, we're having virtual meetups every 2 weeks, but also we have private Facebook groups for tradeswomen. And if you go to the BC Center for Women in the Trades Facebook page, you can see the links to those. And that is actually something people post all the time. How do I approach my boss or this situation? What do I say? Or they'll even post the text of an email they're going to send asking for a raise that's overdue, or whatever. And everyone gives advice, and they're offered scripts, or if they do post something, it is edited. And this is something to have that sort of feedback from people. Sometimes you need that. Like everybody needs that. It is actually something, because sometimes you don't realize, because you're so in the habit of saying, I'm sorry to bother you, but I was wondering if maybe, when what you actually need to say is, I noticed that I didn't receive my the wage increase that I would have expected since I finished this part of schooling. Can you let me have an update, or can you give me an update on that, or something that is factual and that doesn't say you and doesn't say apologize.
Yeah.
And that sort of editing is actually something that everybody can really benefit from, and it's something that we actually can provide for one another as a community of tradeswomen.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you liked our video and you want to see more like it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.